We all know the rhyme, right? Lizzie Borden took an axe. But what if I told you the real horror story didn't start on August 4th, 1892? What if the murders were just the bloody finale to a family drama that had been simmering for years? Today, we're not just looking at the crime scene. We're stepping inside number 92 2nd Street in Fall River, Massachusetts, long before the bodies were found. We're going to uncover the secrets, the resentments, and the suffocating atmosphere that made the Borden house a pressure cooker waiting to explode. Forget the trial for a moment. To understand what happened, you need to understand the people. First, there's Andrew Borden, the patriarch. He wasn't just wealthy, he was notoriously frugal. A millionaire who lived like a pauper. This guy owned vast amounts of real estate and was the president of a major bank. Yet his own home lacked basic plumbing and electricity, amenities that were becoming common for people of far lesser means. He's a man defined by his obsession with money, a trait that would cast a long, dark shadow over his entire family. Then there's Abby Borden, Andrew's second wife and stepmother to his two daughters, Lizzie and Emma. Their own mother had died when they were young, and Abby's arrival was complicated. The girls never truly accepted her. They Kader, Mrs. Borden, a cold, formal title that spoke volumes about the emotional distance in the house. This wasn't a warm, blended family. It was a contractual arrangement, and the tension was palpable. And finally, we have the Borden sisters, Emma and Lizzie. Emma, the older sister, was quiet and reserved, often acting as a buffer. Lizzie, on the other hand, was a different story. She was a complex, strong-willed woman, active in her church and community, yet deeply frustrated by her life at home. At 32 years old, she was an unmarried woman, a spinster, by Victorian standards, living under the thumb of a controlling, miserly father she often clashed. She craved social standing and a life her father's stinginess denied her. Now, let's talk about the house itself. Number 92 2nd Street wasn't just a building. It was a character in this tragedy. It was a narrow, claustrophobic space in the bustling, industrial part of town. Despite Andrew's ability to afford a mansion in the fashionable district known as the Hill, he chose to live here, right in the thick of the noise and the heat, to be close to his businesses. The house was a physical representation of his priorities: profit over comfort, business over family. Imagine the sweltering summer of 1892. No air conditioning, no indoor toilets. The family was eating des-old mutton stew, a dish so unappetizing it made several of them sick. This wasn't just a summer flu. It was a symptom of a deeply dysfunctional household. They were trapped together in the heat, in a home they hated, fueled by resentment and bad food. It's a recipe for disaster. Money was the poison seeping into every crack of the Borden family foundation. It wasn't just about Andrew being cheap. It was about inheritance. A few years before the murders, Andrew made a significant and controversial move. He gifted a property to Abby's half-sister, to Lizzie and Emma. This was a betrayal. It was their asterisk inheritance, their birthright from their mother's side, being given away to a member of Abby's family. The sisters were furious. They confronted their father, and the argument was so intense that they demanded a property of equal value for themselves. Andrew, ever the businessman, transferred their grandfather's house to them for the nominal sum of $1. But the damage was done. This wasn't just about real estate. It was about loyalty. It solidified the battle lines in the house. Lizzie and Emma on one side, Andrew and Abby on the other. From that point on, the sisters often ate their meals separately. The family was literally divided. This financial tension colored everything. Lizzie wanted to travel, to entertain, to live the life she felt her social standing deserved. But Andrew held the purse strings tight. Her life was a cage, albeit a gilded one she couldn't even enjoy. She was an adult woman treated like a child, with no financial independence and no escape route. Can you feel the pressure? Every day was a reminder of what she didn't have, of the control her father and, by extension, her stepmother held over her. Let's also not forget the strict rules of Victorian society. For a woman like Lizzie, her options were limited. Marriage was the primary path to freedom and status, but it hadn't happened for her. Her public life, her church work, was her only outlet. But at home, she was powerless. This stark contrast between her capable public persona and her constrained private life must have been maddening. In the weeks leading up to the murders, things got even stranger. The family suffered from a mysterious stomach illness. Lizzie tried to buy prussic acid, a deadly poison, from a local druggist, claiming she needed it to clean a sealskin cape. The druggist refused to sell it to her. Then there was a bizarre break-in at the barn which Andrew dismissed, believing it was an inside job or a prank. Aben double-locked the doors to the house, making it a veritable fortress, trapping everyone inside with their mounting fears and suspicions. Think about it. A strange illness, an attempt to buy poison, a mysterious break-in, and a father who suspects his own family. The air in that house must have been thick with paranoia. Who were they afraid of? An outside intruder? Or was the real danger already locked inside with them? Just days before the murders, a family friend named John Morse, Lizzie and Emma's maternal uncle, arrived for an extended stay. His visit was unusual. He and Andrew spent hours behind closed doors, reportedly discussing business matters, possibly related to property and wills. To a suspicious mind like Lizzie's, her uncle's sudden appearance and his secret meetings with her father could have been the final straw. Was a father about to change his will and cut her and Emma out, completely in favor of Abby's family? This wasn't just a family. It was a collection of individuals sharing a space, each with their own grievances and secrets. Andrew, obsessed with his money. Abby, the unwanted stepmother. Emma, the silent observer. And Lizzie, the frustrated, ambitious daughter who saw her future slipping away. The Borden house wasn't a home. It was a battleground of quiet whispers, resentful glances, and unspoken threats. So when we look back at that gruesome August morning, we have to see it not as a sudden, inexplicable act of violence, but as the culmination of years of suppressed rage, financial anxiety, and emotional neglect. The axes were just the tools. The real weapon was the toxic environment created within the four walls of 92 Second Street. The family was fractured long before the skulls were. The house was already full of ghosts, the ghosts of affection, trust, and hope long before Andrew and Abby Borden became two of them. August 4th, 1892. A sweltering summer day in Fall River, Massachusetts. Inside the Borden family home at 92 Second Street, a scene of unimaginable horror is about to unfold. This is a story that has baffled and fascinated for over a century. A story of a brutal double murder in broad daylight, a wealthy and dysfunctional family, and a young woman who would become the most infamous accused murderer in American history. Welcome, as we step back in time to reconstruct the gruesome events that led to the question everyone still asks. Did Lizzie Borden really take an axe? To understand the murders, we first have to understand the family. The Bordens were one of the wealthiest families in Fall River, yet they lived a life of extreme frugality. The head of the household was Andrew Borden, a notoriously cheap and widely disliked businessman. His second wife, Abby Borden, was Lizzie's stepmother. Andrew's two daughters from his first marriage, Lizzie, 32, and Emma, 42, lived with them. Tensions in the house were high. The sisters resented their stepmother, whom they called Mrs. Borden, and there were constant disagreements over money and property. Andrew had recently started gifting real estate to Abby's family, which infuriated Lizzie and Emma, who felt their inheritance was being threatened. The atmosphere was a powder keg of resentment, just waiting for a spark. The days leading up to the murders were strange, to say the least. The entire household, except for the family's live-in maid, Bridget Sullivan, had been violently ill with what they thought was food poisoning. Some theories suggest they were intentionally poisoned, but this was never proven. On the morning of August 4th, the day of the murders, the house was unusually quiet. Emma was out of town visiting friends. The only people present were Andrew, Abby, Lizzie, and Bridget. John Morse, the brother of Andrew's first wife, had stayed the night before, but had left early in the morning to visit other relatives, planning to return for lunch. Around 9 a.m., Bridget Sullivan, who the family called Maggie, went outside to wash the windows. Andrew Borden left for his morning walk downtown to conduct business. This left only two people in the house, Abby Borden and Lizzie. This is where our timeline begins to get murky, relying almost entirely on the inconsistent accounts of the only two people who survived the day. Bridget and Lizzie, sometime between 9 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. While Andrew was out, Abby Borden was brutally murdered. She was in the upstairs guest bedroom, making the bed. An attacker crept up behind her and struck her 19 times with a hatchet-like weapon. The blows were so violent, they crushed her skull. She fell face down on the floor, between the bed and the bureau, where her body would lie undiscovered for over an hour. Where was Lizzie during this time? According to her own testimony, she was downstairs, possibly reading a magazine in the dining room or ironing handkerchiefs. She claimed she heard no struggle, no screams, nothing at all from upstairs. Around 10:30 a.m., Andrew Borden returned home from his walk. He found the front door was jammed or locked, so he had to knock. Bridget Sullivan, still feeling unwell from the mysterious illness, struggled with the locks before finally letting him in. She testified that as she fumbled with the door, she heard Lizzie laugh from the top of the stairs. This small detail would become a significant point of contention. Why would Lizzie be laughing at such a moment? Once inside, Andrew, feeling tired and unwell, decided to lie down for a nap on the horsehair sofa in the sitting room. This would be his final mistake. Bridget then went up to her own room on the 3rd floor to rest. This left Andrew Borden asleep and vulnerable on the 1st floor, with Lizzie supposedly still somewhere on the same level. At approximately 11:10 a.m., the house was shaken by a cry. "Maggie, come quick. Father's dead." Somebody came in and killed him. It was Lizzie, calling for Bridget. Bridget rushed downstairs to find a horrific scene. Andrew Borden was slumped on the sofa, his face completely mutilated. He had been struck about 10 or 11 times with the same type of sharp, heavy weapon used on Abby. His wounds were so fresh that he was still bleeding, indicating he had been killed just moments before Lizzie's shout. This is where the forensic oddities begin to pile up. The first and most glaring problem for investigators was the timeline. Lizzie claimed she had been out in the barn for 20 minutes, looking for lead sinkers for a fishing trip. She said she was in the loft of the barn, eating pears. But police who searched the barn loft immediately after found it to be stiflingly hot, with no footprints visible in the thick dust, suggesting no one had been up there recently. Could someone have snuck into the house, killed Abby, waited for an hour, killed Andrew, and then slipped away completely unnoticed? All week into 20-minute window, Lizzie was supposedly in the barn. It seemed highly improbable. Then there was the murder weapon, or rather, the lack of one. A thorough search of the house and property failed to turn up a definitively bloody axe. In the basement, police found several axes and one in particular, the handleless hatchet, drew suspicion. Its wooden handle was broken off, and the blade appeared to have been recently cleaned and dusted with ash, perhaps to make it look like it hadn't been used. Was this the murder weapon, hastily cleaned and disguised? The prosecution certainly thought so, but they could never prove it. The head of the hatchet didn't perfectly match the wounds, leaving reasonable doubt. Perhaps the most damning evidence against Lizzie was her own behavior. In the days following the murders, her actions were bizarre and suspicious. 3 days after the murders, a family friend saw Lizzie in the kitchen, calmly tearing up a dress and burning it in the stove. When asked what she was doing, Lizzie claimed the dress was stained with paint. This was the infamous burned dress incident. The prosecution argued she was destroying a blood-soaked dress, the key piece of physical evidence linking her to the crime. Why else would someone burn a dress just days after their parents were brutally murdered, knowing they were a prime suspect? Her testimony at the inquest was also a disaster. It was confused, contradictory, and filled with holes. She changed her story multiple times about where she was and what she was doing on the morning of the murders. She couldn't seem to remember key details. Was this the result of trauma and the morphine her doctor had prescribed for her nerves? Or was it the tangled web of a liar trying to cover her tracks? For example, she initially told police she thought her stepmother had gone out to visit a sick friend, even though she would have had to pass right by Abby's dead body at the top of the stairs to go to her own room. The motive was also a strong point for the prosecution. Money. The deep-seated resentment over Andrew's property management and the potential loss of inheritance provided a powerful reason for murder. With both her father and stepmother gone, Lizzie and her sister Emma would inherit the entire Borden fortune, valued at around $300,000. At the time an enormous sum, equivalent to over $9 million today. The day before the murders, Lizzie had also allegedly tried to purchase prussic acid, a deadly poison, from a local drugstore, claiming she needed it to clean a sealskin cape. The pharmacist refused to sell it to her. This poison attempt suggested premeditation, a desire to kill her parents that existed even before the day of the axe murders. Despite all this circumstantial evidence, Lizzie Borden was acquitted. The trial was a media sensation, one of the first major trials of the century in America. Her defense team was brilliant. They portrayed her as a gentle, church-going, upper-class woman, incapable of such a brutal act. In the Victorian era, the idea of a woman from a respected family committing such a violent crime was almost unthinkable to the all-male jury. They could unreconcile the image of the demure Sunday school teacher with that of a frenzied axe murderer. The lack of a clear murder weapon, the absence of any blood on Lizzie's person or clothing immediately after the discovery of the bodies, and the conflicting expert testimony all created enough reasonable doubt. After just 90 minutes of deliberation, the jury came back with a verdict. Not guilty. Lizzie and Emma inherited their father's fortune and moved to a grand mansion in a fashionable part of town, which they named Maplecroft. But Lizzie was never free. She was ostracized by the community of Fall River. She lived the rest of her life as a social pariah, forever branded by suspicion. The case was officially closed, but the mystery was just beginning. If Lizzie didn't do it, who did? Over the years, dozens of theories have emerged. Some point to Bridget Sullivan, the maid, who had a clear window of opportunity. Others suggest an illegitimate son of Andrews, a man named William Borden, seeking revenge and his inheritance. Even Lizzie's sister, Emma, who was miles away, has been floated as a possible conspirator, arranging the crime from afar. Another theory suggests John Morse, the uncle who had stayed the night, returned to the house to commit the murders over a business dispute. But no other theory holds as much weight or fits the strange circumstances as well as the one pointing to Lizzie. The locked rooms, the convenient trip to the barn, the burned dress, the attempted poison purchase, and the contradictory statements all create a compelling, if circumstantial, case against her. The story of Lizzie Borden is a chilling reminder that sometimes the most horrifying monsters are the ones we would never suspect, hidden behind a mask of normalcy. Over 130 years later, the house on 2nd Street still stands, now a museum and a bed and breakfast, where visitors can ponder the events of that hot August day. The case remains unsolved, a dark and bloody chapter in American crime history, forever sealed with the haunting children's rhyme it inspired. Lizzie Borden took an axe. We're talking about the trial of the century, a legal spectacle that blurred the lines between justice and entertainment, turning a courtroom into a stage where reputations were made and shattered. This case had everything: shocking allegations, celebrity, a mountain of evidence, and a verdict that still sparks debate decades later. So, grab your coffee, get comfortable, and let's unravel the story of how a brutal crime became a battleground for gender, class, and the very nature of truth itself. It all began on a grim summer night. 2 people were found brutally murdered, and the evidence quickly pointed to one of America's most beloved figures. The arrest was shocking, but what followed was even more surreal. A slow-speed chase broadcast live to 95 million people. This wasn't just a news story anymore. It was a real-time drama, and the nation was hooked. From the very start, the lines were drawn. The prosecution believed they had an open and shut case, a mountain of physical evidence that seemed to create an unbreakable chain linking the suspect to the crime scene. They had blood evidence, fibers, footprints, and a history of domestic violence that painted a dark, disturbing picture, starkly contrasting the suspect's public persona. The prosecution, led by a team of determined and media-savvy lawyers, was confident. They laid out their case piece by piece, like a grim puzzle. They presented DNA evidence, a technology that was still relatively new and fascinating to the public. They argued that the blood found at the scene, in the suspect's car, and at his home told an undeniable story. They brought forward witnesses who testified to a pattern of controlling behavior and violent outbursts. The prosecution's narrative was simple and powerful, a jealous rage that spiraled into a double murder. To them, the science was irrefutable. They wanted the jury and the world to see the man behind the celebrity mask, a man they believed was a cold-blooded killer. Each day, they presented another piece of damning evidence, confident that the sheer weight of it all would lead to a swift conviction. But then came the defense. If the prosecution was building a fortress of facts, the defense arrived with a bulldozer. They assembled what was famously dubbed the Dream Team, a group of brilliant legal minds who understood one crucial thing. This trial wasn't just about the evidence, it was about the story, and they were determined to tell a better one. They didn't just challenge the prosecution's case, they attacked its very foundation. They knew they couldn't make the evidence disappear, so they decided to make the jury doubt where it came from. Their strategy was audacious. Attack the credibility of the police, suggest evidence tampering, and introduce the explosive element of race. The defense's counterattack was a masterclass in legal maneuvering. One of their most famous lines was, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." This moment, involving a pair of gloves found at the crime scene, became one of the most iconic images of the trial. The suspect struggled to put them on in front of the jury, a piece of courtroom theater that was more powerful than any scientific testimony. The defense argued this was proof of his innocence. The prosecution argued the gloves had shrunk from being soaked in blood and then frozen and unfrozen, but the visual was what mattered. The Dream Team methodically chipped away at the prosecution's witnesses, questioning their motives and highlighting inconsistencies. They turned the focus away from the suspect and squarely onto the Los Angeles Police Department, suggesting a conspiracy rooted in racism to frame a successful black man. Suddenly, the trial was no longer just about the murders. It had become a referendum on the justice system, race relations in America, and the power of celebrity. The media frenzy was unlike anything seen before. TV networks provided gavel-to-gavel coverage. Every lawyer, witness, and family member became a household name. Pundits and legal analysts debated every twist and turn on nightly news shows. The courtroom became a theater, and everyone had a front-row seat. This relentless media attention amplified the case's central themes. Was this a classic case of a wealthy celebrity buying his way out of justice? Or was it a case of a deeply flawed and racially biased system trying to take down a black icon? The public was sharply divided, often along racial lines. It seemed everyone had an opinion, and the 24/7 news cycle fed the fire, turning legal experts into TV stars and complex legal arguments into bite-sized sound bites. This media storm transformed the case into a cultural phenomenon. It wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was the ultimate reality show. The trial became a battleground for much larger social issues. It exposed the deep-seated mistrust between the black community and law enforcement. It raised uncomfortable questions about domestic violence and how it is often hidden behind a facade of fame and fortune. The prosecution focused on the evidence of abuse, hoping to show a pattern of violence. The defense, in turn, argued that the police were the real villains, planting evidence and driven by racism. The courtroom became a proxy war for America's deepest anxieties about race, class, and gender. The two victims, a young mother and a waiter, often felt like secondary characters in a drama that was spiraling far beyond the facts of their tragic deaths. Their lives and the brutality of the crime were sometimes lost in the spectacle. After months of testimony, a shocking verdict was delivered: not guilty. The reaction was immediate and polarized. Images of jubilant celebrations on one side and stunned, tearful silence on the other flooded the airwaves, perfectly capturing the nation's deep division. For some, the verdict was a triumph against a corrupt and racist system. It was a sign that a black man could, for once, face the power of the state and win. For others, it was a gross miscarriage of justice, proof that fame and money could place someone above the law. They saw the mountain of physical evidence and could uncomprehend how a jury could reach any conclusion other than guilt. The verdict didn't end the debate, it intensified it. The trial was over, but the arguments had just begun, echoing in living rooms, workplaces, and newsrooms across the country. In the aftermath, no one emerged unscathed. The suspect was acquitted in criminal court, but later found liable for the deaths in a civil trial, a verdict that only added to the complexity and confusion. The families of the victims were left without the justice they sought in the criminal system. The reputations of the lawyers on both sides were cemented in legal history, for better or for worse. The trial left a lasting legacy. It changed how the media covers legal cases, ushering in an era of 24/7 trial coverage and legal punditry. It forced a national conversation about race and policing, issues that remain just as urgent today. It also highlighted the power of narrative in a courtroom. How a compelling story can sometimes be more persuasive than a pile of facts. The trial of the century wasn't just about one man's guilt or innocence. It was a reflection of society itself, our divisions, our prejudices, and our complicated relationship with truth, fame, and justice. It remains a powerful, cautionary tale about what happens when a courtroom becomes a stage and the search for truth gets lost in the spotlight. Over a century ago, in the quiet town of Fall River, Massachusetts, a crime so brutal and baffling occurred that it still echoes through American history. On a sweltering August morning in 1892, Andrew and Abby Borden were found murdered in their home, victims of a vicious axe attack. The prime suspect, Andrew's own daughter, Lizzie Borden. The case became an instant media sensation, a gripping tale of family strife, wealth, and unimaginable violence. But did she really do it? Today, we're going to revisit this infamous case, peeling back the layers of myth and legend to examine the evidence through a modern lens. We'll explore the physical clues, dive into the psychological theories, and even consider some alternative suspects you might not have heard of. Join us as we try to answer the question that has haunted generations. Was Lizzie Borden a cold-blooded killer, an innocent woman wrongly accused, or something far more complicated? Let's start by setting the scene. The Borden household was far from a happy home. It was a pressure cooker of tension and resentment. Andrew Borden was a wealthy, but notoriously frugal man. He, his second wife Abby, and his two adult daughters, Lizzie and Emma, lived in a house without modern conveniences like indoor plumbing or electricity. Despite Andrew's considerable wealth, Lizzie and Emma, both unmarried and in their 30s, felt trapped. They resented their stepmother, Abby, believing she was after their father's money and their inheritance. There were arguments over property, whispers of family secrets, and a general air of discontent that hung heavy in the home. Just days before the murders, the entire family, except for Lizzie, fell violently ill. Lizzie claimed it was from old mutton, but Abby feared they were being poisoned. This backdrop of dysfunction is crucial. It provides a powerful motive, a desperate desire for freedom and financial independence. For Lizzie, her father's death meant inheriting a fortune and escaping a life of This motive was the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Now, let's look at the physical evidence, or perhaps the striking lack of it. The murder weapon, a hatchet, was found in the basement. Its handle was broken, and the head was covered in ash, as if someone had tried to clean it. Forensic science in the 1890s was in its infancy. There was no fingerprinting, no DNA analysis. The prosecution couldn't definitively link this hatchet to the murderers or to Lizzie. The biggest mystery, however, was the absence of blood. The crime scene was horrific, a chaotic spray of blood covering the walls and furniture. The killer would have been drenched. Yet, when police arrived, just minutes after Lizzie discovered her father's body, she was pristine. Her dress was clean, her skin unblemished. The prosecution argued she must have changed her clothes. In fact, a few days later, Lizzie was seen by a friend burning a blue dress in the kitchen stove, claiming it was stained with paint. Was this the dress she wore during the murders? Or was she, as she claimed, simply getting rid of an old garment? Without the dress, there was no proof. This lack of a bloody weapon and bloody clothes created immense reasonable doubt for the jury. The timeline of that fateful morning is another tangled web of contradictions. According to Lizzie, on the morning of August 4th, her father went downtown. Her uncle visited. The maid Bridget Sullivan was outside washing windows, and her stepmother Abby was upstairs making the bed. Lizzie claimed she was in the barn looking for lead sinkers for a fishing trip. She said she was there for about 15 to 20 minutes. When she returned to the house, she found her father's body on the sitting room couch. She called for Bridget, who had just come back inside, and sent her to get a doctor. It was only later that Abby's body was discovered upstairs in the guest room. The coroner determined that Abby had been killed first, perhaps an hour and a half before Andrew. This means the killer was in the house, lying in wait for over an hour. Where was Lizzie during this time? Her alibi, being in the barn, was flimsy at best. Police found no footprints in the dusty barn loft, and it's hard to imagine anyone spending 20 minutes in that stifling heat. Her story was inconsistent and changed several times during questioning. This, combined with her strange, calm demeanor after the discovery, made her look incredibly guilty. Yet, her initial inquest testimony, full of contradictions, was deemed inadmissible in court. This legal ruling was a major blow to the prosecution and a huge advantage for Lizzie's defense team. Despite the strong circumstantial evidence and a compelling motive, Lizzie Borden was acquitted. The jury, composed entirely of men, deliberated for just 90 minutes. Why? For one, the idea that a respectable, church-going Victorian woman could commit such a heinous act was almost unthinkable to the public and the jury. The defense, led by a former governor of masterfully painted her as a grieving, fragile daughter, incapable of such brutality. They highlighted the botched police investigation and the lack of hard evidence. The prosecution, on the other hand, made several blunders. Their closing argument was weak, and their star witness, the one who saw Lizzie burning the dress, wasn't persuasive enough. Ultimately, the jury couldn't convict beyond a reasonable doubt. The acquittal shocked many, but it cemented Lizzie's place in folklore. She inherited her father's wealth, bought a grand mansion in another part of town, and lived out the rest of her life as a wealthy but ostracized figure, forever shadowed by the murders. So, if not Lizzie, then who? Over the years, several alternative theories have emerged. One popular suspect is Bridget Sullivan, the maid. She was the only other person in the house, confirmed to be there during the murders. Perhaps she had a grievance with the Bordens. They were known to be difficult employers. Could she have snapped? Or maybe she was an accomplice, helping Lizzie and then being paid off to keep quiet. After the trial, Bridget left Fall River and was never heard from again, which adds to the suspicion. Another compelling theory points to John Morse, Lizzie's maternal uncle, who had mysteriously shown up the night before the murders to discuss business with Andrew. His alibi for the time of the murders was solid, but his visit was oddly timed. Some speculate he had a financial dispute with Andrew and hired a... Then there's the theory of an illegitimate son of Andrew's, a man named William Borden, who may have come to demand his inheritance and was met with violence. Each of these theories has its own set of clues and supporters, but like the case against Lizzie, they all lack definitive proof. The truth is, the crime was so messy and the investigation so flawed that it left the door open for endless speculation. Let's bring in modern criminology and psychology. How would this case be handled today? First, the crime scene would be meticulously preserved. DNA would be collected from every surface. The blood spatter patterns would be analyzed to reconstruct the attacks and determine the position of the assailant. This could prove or disprove whether someone could have committed the murders without getting blood on themselves. The hatchet would be tested for DNA and trace evidence. Lizzie's burned dress fragments would be analyzed. Modern psychology might offer insights into Lizzie's state of mind. Was her calm demeanor a sign of a sociopath? Or was she in a state of shock and disassociation? A common trauma response. Her conflicting testimony would be scrutinized by experts in deception detection. A profiler might create a psychological sketch of the killer based on the extreme, overkill nature of the attacks, which often points to a personal rage, someone known to the victims. While we can't go back in time and run these tests, applying modern techniques to the existing evidence strongly suggests a crime of passion committed by someone inside the house. The sheer rage of the attack, the Specialty 19 blows to Abby's head, points to a deep, personal hatred. This brings us back, time and again, to the simmering resentments within the Borden family. So, after reviewing the evidence, what's the verdict? Guilty, innocent, or something in between? The enduring power of the Lizzie Borden case lies in its ambiguity. There is a mountain of circumstantial evidence pointing to her guilt. The motive, the opportunity, the inconsistent alibi, the burning of the dress. She is, by far, the most logical suspect. However, the prosecution's failure to produce a single piece of direct, irrefutable evidence, no bloody clothes, no definitive murder weapon meant they couldn't close the case. The jury made its decision based on the law and the evidence presented to them, and they found reasonable doubt. Perhaps the most plausible theory is that Lizzie did commit the murders but had help. Maybe from Bridget the maid or her sister Emma, who who was conveniently out of town but might have helped plan it. This could explain how the scene was managed and how Lizzie remained clean. But this too is just speculation. In the end, the Borden murders remain a perfect, unsolved mystery. It's a dark mirror reflecting the anxieties of its team about family, class, and the hidden violence lurking beneath the veneer of Victorian respectability. The case lives on not because we know what happened, but precisely because we don't. The mystery itself has become the legend. What do you think? After hearing the evidence, do you believe Lizzie Borden got away with murder? Or was she a victim of circumstance, forever condemned in the court of public opinion? Let us know your theories in the comments below. The debate has been raging for over 130 years, and it shows no signs of stopping. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into one of America's most haunting cold cases.